The first sign of trouble started with a single patient. Dr. Emily Carter glanced at the chart, her exhaustion pressing down on her like a lead weight. It had been another brutal night at St. Mary's Hospital in downtown Chicago. The flu season had hit hard, but something about this patient, an unidentified middle-aged man, felt different. His skin was pallid, clammy, and his breathing was shallow. But it was his eyes that unsettled her the most, glassy, almost vacant, yet filled with something primal. "Doctor?" A nurse, Alan, called out. His heart rate just dropped to, "Wait, it's gone." The heart monitor flatlined. Emily cursed under her breath. "Start CPR." Alan placed his hands on the man's chest and began compressions. 1, 2, 3. The patient's body convulsed violently. His eyes snapped open, pupils dilated into bottomless voids. Before anyone could react, he lunged, teeth sinking deep into Alan's throat. A wet, sickening crunch filled the room. Alan let out a gurgled scream. Emily stumbled back, horror paralyzing her limbs. Blood sprayed across the floor as the patient, now a snarling monster, tore into Alan's flesh like a rabid animal. Security burst in, tasers drawn. "Get him off," one of them shouted. The monster turned, eyes locking onto the nearest guard. It lunged. A gunshot echoed through the ER, followed by another. The creature jerked, then collapsed in a twitching heap. The horror didn't end there. Alan, lying in a pool of his own blood, stopped moving. His eyes glazed over, then, impossibly, he moved again. He stood. Emily's stomach twisted. No. No, no, no. Chaos erupted in the hospital. Within an hour, more patients displayed the same symptoms. Bites turned people rabid. Corpses didn't stay dead. Doctors, nurses, even police officers fell one by one, and those who died, rose again. 6:15 a.m., downtown Chicago. Detective Sam Reyes lit a cigarette, watching the early morning commuters flow through the city. His radio buzzed. "All units, 10 to 99 at St. Mary's Hospital. Requesting immediate backup. A 10 to 99, emergency distress." His gut clenched. He flicked the cigarette away and sped toward the hospital. The scene was madness. Blood streaked the pavement outside the ER. A woman covered in scratches pounded on the locked doors, screaming for help. Two officers fired their weapons into the growing crowd of what looked like deranged lunatics attacking anything that moved. Reyes grabbed his radio. "What the hell is happening?" "Unknown infection," the dispatcher's voice cut out in static. A man, his skin torn, eyes vacant, lunged at Reyes. Instinct kicked in. He fired a single shot. The man staggered but didn't fall. Another shot. The creature still moved. A third shot, straight to the head, finally put him down. Reyes stared in shock. What the hell? Sirens blared in the distance. Explosions rocked the city as fire consumed the skyline. People ran screaming, clawing at each other in sheer panic. A news chopper circled overhead. Unconfirmed reports of violent riots. The broadcast was cut short as the chopper spiraled downward, crashing into the streets below. The city was falling apart. Reyes clenched his jaw. Day zero, he holstered his gun and turned toward the growing horde. The world had just ended. 6:45 a.m., Chicago Police Department headquarters. The precinct was a war zone. Phones rang off the hook, dispatchers shouted over each other, and officers scrambled to gear up. Captain Henry Lawson slammed his fist on the table, demanding silence. "We're locking the city down. All bridges are to be closed. The governor wants containment." A deafening crash interrupted him as the front doors burst open. A panicked officer, covered in blood, stumbled in. "They don't die," he screamed. The infected followed. Gunfire erupted. Officers emptied their clips, but the creatures kept coming. Only headshots stopped them. The untrained were devoured in minutes. Those who escaped fled into the chaos outside, leaving the station to burn. 7:30 a.m., downtown Chicago. Detective Sam Reyes ran through the streets, dodging stampedes of civilians. The undead were everywhere, clawing, biting, turning others within minutes. A city bus crashed into a storefront, crushing fleeing pedestrians. Helicopters circled above but provided no help. Sam spotted a father trying to protect his daughter from an oncoming swarm. He aimed and fired. The creatures dropped. "Go! Run!" The father grabbed his daughter and disappeared into an alley. Sam turned a corner and saw an even bigger nightmare, a military convoy surrounded. Soldiers fought, but they were losing. Then came the unthinkable. A voice boomed over loudspeakers. "Martial law is in effect. Lethal force authorized. All civilians are expendable." The military had given up on saving the city. Sam ducked into an abandoned store. He needed to find a way out, before the city became his grave. 8:15 a.m., Chicago, South Loop. Smoke choked the skyline. Sirens had begun to fade, replaced by the unrelenting screams of the dying. What remained of the Chicago Police Department was in shambles. The National Guard had moved in, setting up makeshift quarantine zones, but their orders were clear: containment at all costs. Detective Sam Reyes crouched behind an overturned SUV, watching a squad of soldiers block off an intersection. Civilians begged to be let through, pounding against hastily assembled barricades of sandbags and barbed wire. A soldier raised his rifle. "Step back. Last warning." A woman clutched her young son, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "Please. He's not sick. He's just a kid. No mercy." The gunshot rang out, and the mother crumpled. The boy wailed, only for another shot to silence him. Sam clenched his jaw, rage boiling in his veins. This wasn't quarantine, it was extermination. A hand grabbed his arm. He spun, gun raised, only to lower it when he saw her. Dr. Emily Carter. Blood smeared her coat, but none of it was hers. "You're alive," she breathed. "Not for long if we stay here." He gestured to the slaughter unfolding ahead. "They're killing survivors." Emily's face paled. "We need to get out of the city." They weren't alone. A group of survivors had gathered: a firefighter named Jackson, a journalist named Lisa, and a teenage hacker, Will. They had one goal: escape. But first, they needed a way past the quarantine zones. 9:30 a.m., Wabash Avenue quarantine checkpoint. The group approached cautiously. Sam counted 6 soldiers. The lead officer barked orders: "No one leaves. We hold the line." Lisa, the journalist, narrowed her eyes. They knew this was coming. She held up her phone. A news source leaked a memo: government officials were evacuated hours ago. "They left us to die," Jackson growled. Sam's grip on his gun tightened. "Then we take matters into our own hands." Their plan was simple but dangerous. Lisa would create a distraction, luring the soldiers away, while Sam, Jackson, and Emily slipped through the barricade. Will, the hacker, would disable a security feed to buy them time. Lisa ran forward, screaming, "Please! Help me!" The soldiers turned, weapons raised. "Stay where you are." That was their opening. Sam and Jackson moved fast, taking down 2 soldiers in brutal silence. Emily and Will followed. The group sprinted toward a military transport truck parked near the barricade. Then the betrayal came. A gunshot. Lisa gasped, clutching her stomach. Blood seeped between her fingers. She turned, confused. One of the survivors they had trusted had fired. Will's eyes widened in horror. "Why?" The traitor sneered. "Survival of the fittest." He ran, vanishing into the chaos. Lisa fell to her knees. Sam caught her before she hit the ground. "Stay with me." She coughed, blood bubbling at her lips. "Get out." More soldiers arrived, guns drawn. No time to grieve. Jackson yanked Sam up. "We have to go." With a final look at Lisa's lifeless body, they jumped into the military truck and gunned it. The barricade shattered under the vehicle's weight. Behind them, the city continued to burn. The world had abandoned them. But they weren't going down without a fight. 11:45 a.m., abandoned news station, West Chicago. The military truck roared down the highway, weaving through burning wreckage and abandoned cars. The city was dying, but it wasn't dead yet. Sam Reyes gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Every street, every alley was crawling with the infected. In the rearview mirror, he saw Emily, Jackson, and Will, what was left of their group, clutching their weapons like lifelines. "We need a new plan," Emily said. "Getting out of Chicago isn't enough. This isn't just here, it's everywhere." Sam clenched his jaw. "Then we tell the world what's really happening." Lisa, the journalist who had died at the checkpoint, had mentioned something before she was shot, a secure news station where the last independent reporters had been broadcasting before the government blacked them out. If they could get there, maybe they could warn people. Maybe they could expose the truth. The station was only a few miles away, but the streets were a battlefield. They had one shot. 12:15 p.m., the streets of Chicago. The truck skidded to a stop outside the battered remains of the Channel 7 news building. Smoke poured from shattered windows. The front doors had been forced open, and the silence was deafening. Jackson gripped a shotgun. "I don't like this." Sam ignored the sinking feeling in his gut. "We move fast. In and out." They entered cautiously. Inside, the place was wrecked, cameras smashed, desks overturned, blood smeared across the walls. The news team was gone. Then a voice crackled through the static of a nearby radio. "If anyone's listening, this is Randall King. Channel 7 is still operational, the truth needs to be told." "He's alive," Will whispered. They followed the sound down a dark hallway, weapons raised. At the end, in a locked studio, they found him, a middle-aged reporter, face gaunt, eyes wild with desperation. He pointed a gun at them. "Back off." Emily stepped forward, hands raised. "We're not infected. We came to help." Randall hesitated, then lowered the gun. "You have no idea what's happening." Sam exhaled. "Then tell us." Randall pulled them into the studio, where the last working camera flickered. He clicked on a screen, showing maps covered in red zones. "This isn't just Chicago. New York, LA, Houston, they're gone. The military isn't fighting to save us. They're cleaning up loose ends." "What about the government?" Jackson asked. Randall shook his head. "They've gone silent. The last order was containment. That's it." Sam's stomach dropped. "They're going to wipe us out." Randall nodded grimly. "They already have a plan. Airstrikes." Emily's face paled. "They're going to bomb the city?" "Not just the city. Every major infection zone. In 6 hours, Chicago will be reduced to ash." Silence fell over the room. Will spoke first. "Then we have to warn people." Randall sat at the console, flipping switches. The old transmission systems sputtered to life. "If we do this, we become targets." Sam glanced at his friends. "We're already targets." Randall gave a tight nod. "Then let's make history." 12:45 p.m., the last broadcast. The cameras rolled. Randall sat at the desk, staring into the lens. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with urgency. "This is Randall King, Channel 7 News. If you're hearing this, know that everything you've been told is a lie. The infection is spreading, and the government's response isn't salvation, it's extermination. In 6 hours, Chicago will be destroyed. If you're alive, run. Get out while you still can." Static filled the airwaves. Then, gunfire. A red dot appeared on Randall's forehead. A single shot rang out, and he slumped forward, dead. Sam ducked. "They found us." Bullets tore through the studio. Soldiers swarmed the building. They had one choice: run. Sam grabbed Will and Emily, shoving them toward the exit. Jackson covered them, firing back, but he was outnumbered. "Go!" he yelled. Sam hesitated, then turned and ran. As they escaped through the back, an explosion rocked the station. The screen that once carried their message flickered into darkness. But the truth had been spoken. Now, the world had to decide whether to listen. 1:30 p.m., Chicago outskirts. The roads were clogged with abandoned cars, bodies, and the relentless undead. Sam Reyes floored the accelerator, swerving around wreckage as Will and Emily clung to their seats. The military truck roared through the suburbs, its engine the only sound above the distant screams. Jackson was gone. The news station had been their last shot at warning people, but the military had responded with brutal efficiency. The broadcast had aired, but they had no way of knowing if anyone had heard it. Ahead, a checkpoint loomed, one of the last still standing. Soldiers lined the barricades, their faces hard, weapons raised. Will tensed. "What do we do?" "We're not stopping," Sam growled. The moment they were in range, the soldiers opened fire. Bullets ricocheted off the truck's reinforced sides. Sam yanked the wheel, ramming through the blockade. The vehicle bucked wildly but held together. Emily gasped. "They're really killing everyone, aren't they?" Will's voice was hollow. "We're not civilians anymore. We're loose ends." The truck thundered past the checkpoint. The city shrank in the rearview mirror, but the horrors ahead were just beginning. 2:15 p.m., Interstate 55. Sam slowed the truck as they approached a mass of wrecked cars and bodies. A military Humvee was overturned, smoke rising from its engine. A torn-up sign read, "Evacuation Center 5 miles ahead." Hope flickered in Emily's eyes. If they were evacuating people, there could be survivors. Sam wasn't convinced, but they had no other options. Supplies were running low, and they needed answers. They moved cautiously through the wreckage, weapons ready. The silence was unsettling. No gunfire. No screams. Just the distant wind. Then, a voice. Weak, but alive. "Help, please." Sam signaled the others forward. They found the source, a wounded soldier slumped against an overturned ambulance. His uniform was stained with blood, his face pale. Emily knelt beside him. "You're hurt." "We can." The soldier's fingers clamped around her wrist. His bloodshot eyes burned with desperation. "Turn back." Emily froze. "What?" The soldier coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. "It's not safe." The evacuation center, his breath hitched. Gone, infected, no survivors. Will's stomach dropped. "Then where do we go?" The soldier's grip loosened. His final words were barely a whisper. "There's nowhere left." His body slumped forward. Dead. A new sound filled the air. The moans of the undead. 2:45 p.m. The massacre. The horde came fast, hundreds, maybe thousands, drawn by the scent of blood. Some were fresh, others rotting, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of hunger. Sam fired first, dropping 2, but it was like throwing stones into an ocean. They were surrounded. "Run," he shouted. They sprinted back to the truck, dodging grasping hands. Will tripped, but Sam yanked him up just in time. Emily fired wildly, clearing a path. They reached the vehicle, slamming the doors shut as the undead swarmed around them. Sam jammed the truck into reverse, tires screeching. Bodies thumped against the sides, hands clawing at the windows. Then, an explosion, far ahead, beyond the next ridge. A mushroom of fire and smoke rose into the sky. Emily's voice was a whisper. "The bombings have started." Sam gritted his teeth. "We need to move. Now." With no safe haven left, there was only one thing left to do. Survive. 3:15 p.m., the edge of Chicago. The sky burned. Smoke and ash swirled like a storm, carried by the shockwaves of distant explosions. The military had begun their final solution, airstrikes designed to erase the infection, and everyone still alive with it. Sam Reyes gripped the wheel, his face set in stone. The truck tore down an open stretch of road, its tires leaving tracks on the blood-stained pavement. Behind him, Emily reloaded her pistol with shaking hands, while Will clutched his laptop, eyes wide with fear. "We need to find shelter," Emily said. "If we don't, we'll burn with the city." Sam's jaw tightened. "There's no shelter. No rescue. Just us." Will's voice was small. "Then what do we do?" The road ahead split, one path led to the outskirts, the last chance to leave Chicago. The other curved toward an old industrial sector, where abandoned factories loomed like steel graveyards. Then Sam saw it, a helicopter, hovering above the wreckage, its spotlight sweeping the streets. A voice crackled over a distant speaker. "All remaining survivors, head to Extraction Point Echo. This is your last chance." Will's eyes lit up. "Did you hear that? We're not alone." Emily pointed toward the industrial district. "That's where they're headed. If we can get there before the final strike." Sam didn't hesitate. He turned the wheel, sending the truck barreling toward their last hope. 3:45 p.m. Extraction Point Echo. They arrived to find chaos. The makeshift landing zone was overrun, civilians, soldiers, and the infected locked in a final battle. The helicopter loomed above, its rotors kicking up dust, but the pilot hesitated to land. A soldier waved frantically from the tarmac. "We're taking off in 5 minutes. Get on or get left behind." The infected surged. People screamed as they were torn apart. Bullets flew in every direction. Sam grabbed Will. "Stay close." They ran, weaving through the carnage. Emily fired, dropping a creature lunging for Will. Sam slammed the butt of his rifle into another, cracking its skull. Then, disaster, Emily screamed. A hand clamped onto her ankle. She tripped, hitting the ground hard. Sam turned, seeing the horror in her eyes. The infected were closing in. "Go!" she shouted. "No!" Sam reached for her, but more hands grabbed her. Will yanked at Sam's arm. "We have to go." Emily locked eyes with him. No fear. Just a quiet acceptance. Then she pulled the pin from a grenade. "Run!" Sam turned, dragging Will as Emily disappeared in a fireball. The force of the explosion threw them forward. The helicopter doors were open, soldiers fired into the horde, buying them seconds. Sam shoved Will up first. The kid barely made it before Sam leaped for the edge, strong hands grabbed him, pulling him inside. The doors slammed shut. The chopper lifted. Below, the infected swarmed over Emily's burning remains. The last civilians fell, screaming. The city itself seemed to groan as the first missile hit the skyline. Will sobbed. Sam stared blankly as the world turned to fire. 4 p.m., the end of Chicago. From the sky, they watched the city die. Entire blocks vanished in flames. Buildings crumbled. The streets became rivers of molten destruction. Will wiped his eyes. What now? Sam didn't answer. There was no victory. No safety. Just survival. The chopper flew toward the unknown. Chicago was gone. The apocalypse had only just begun. The end.